every kid is different. Their children are not fungible. They're not interchangeable. Like you've probably got Nabisco in your pantry right now. It's possible to like the name Nabisco and never put it together that it's a contraction of National Biscuit Company. It's easy to get your first name job because all of the big naming agencies are so horny for the talent.
Zucchinis? Give me the paper. Nice.
I love you, Texas.
Hey guys, I'm Young, a full-time dad and a full-time professional with the goal to become the best parent possible. The Girl Dad Show is my journey interviewing fellow working parents aspiring to be both good at work and parenting. I'm going to do this by gathering and sharing unfiltered perspectives from my guests, so join me as I research parenthood one interview at a time. This episode of The Girl Dad Show is brought to you by 212. Among the many things that I do, I'm also an angel investor. The two biggest mistakes I see founders make when they come to me for investments are one, they don't have a clean cap table, and two, they are unable to clearly articulate how my equity will dilute over future rounds, and more importantly, what my ROI will be when the company exits. It's very difficult for me to make my investment decisions without these data points. 212 solves this problem for both me and the founders. For $240 a year, 212 offers an incredibly powerful cap table management and valuation modeling platform. It is by far one of the most powerful productivity tools I've seen, and I highly recommend every founder sign up. Modeling convertible notes, safes, price rounds, pro rata, liquidation preferences, and exit events is a breeze on 212. Founders can then easily share all these complex calculations and what-if scenarios with investors and close their round much quicker. They're also giving my listeners 25% off their first year's membership costs if you use the discount code TGDS at checkout. If you're a founder or investor, you should absolutely get on 212 as soon as possible. It's an absolute no-brainer. Dilution is real and complex. Cap table management is confusing and expensive. You need to get on 212 today. What's the point of building a successful company you don't own? Steve, welcome to the Girl Dad Show. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm a girl dad as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and so how old is your daughter?
I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. How about you?
My daughter turned 2 yesterday, and today she's 28.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. So she's a full-blown adult. What is she doing?
So she was a video production major with a computer science minor.
Oh, fantastic.
She was with She Media, right in Manhattan. And boy, yeah, you think Silicon Valley is rough.
My apologies. My kid in true Girl Dad Show fashion is joining the podcast for a brief second.
Oh,
so I apologize for that. But Steve, before I know we jumped right in, but I'd love to actually start by letting the listeners know what you do for a living.
So I'm a namer. I name new products and new companies. And I know it's a weird thing to specialize in, but I've always been able to write short. I got my start in newspaper, headlines on deadlines, and moved into magazine. And I became a magazine publisher in the Midwest. And while I was looking at the books, and the three biggest checks that I wrote were to the publisher, to the post office, to the printer, and to my ad salespeople. So I learned how to sell ads, and that got me transferred back here to the Bay Area. So I repped a bunch of ad agencies, from a new business standpoint. And one of the things I noticed in the 90s was that nobody wanted to talk about advertising. They didn't even want to talk about marketing communications or anything. They wanted to talk about branding. And branding is, the biggest part of branding is the naming. And so the game came back to me, Coach. And so, I went back and became an account executive at a naming agency. Hold on. My little girl wants to say hi. She doesn't understand why I suddenly start talking.
That's awesome. You have a girl dog as well too. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you're a true girl dad. I love it. You have a girl daughter and a girl dog.
Yes. This is Veronica.
Veronica, nice to meet you, Veronica.
Yeah. So in 1995, I won a contest for Name This Soda in one of the advertising magazines, and that led to a couple of other paid jobs. So I decided I was gonna double down on naming, and so Andy Cunningham, our mutual connection, she hired me as a director of verbal branding for Cunningham Communication in the year 2000, and it was the worst timing of all, because you might remember in 2000 we were shitting kittens. But in 2001, that was that tech bubble burst that.
I still can't get over the fact that this is what you do for a living. How does one get into the business of naming things? What a cool job.
Super good question. It's easy to get your first name job because all of the big naming agencies are so horny for the talent, right? It's impossible to get your second name job if all the stuff on your list was average, right? So, full disclosure, I've done 841 name jobs.
Wow.
And I would also accept holy cow, and
Holy cow. Wow, that's a lot of naming.
yeah, if I was just the new business guy at an agency and I sold 840 name jobs, I'd be the stud of the office, right? But
Wow.
I've actually done all the account work for those jobs. I write all the creative briefs. I come up with all the names. Everybody gets 250, sometimes 300 names. I apologize in advance. I'm not a perfectionist, but I am obsessive compulsive, and I got a lot of Steves up here. Earlier today I was lifeguard Steve.
So what's really cool about this is that, to be honest with you, Steve, I've never even knew that this was a job, and yet a whole industry with agencies that specialized in this, with account managers and people recruiting for it. Like, I actually didn't even know this was like a function before I met you.
My ex-wife said the same thing. I said, I'm going to be a namer. And she goes, a namer? Is that even a thing?
That's right.
And, in the early days, I charged, $2,500 for a name job. Then it was $3,750. Then I got it up to $5,000, and then it was $7,500, and then I was at $9,000, and now I charge $11,000 for a name job, which it's a mere fraction of what a big naming agency, the Landors or the Lexicons or the Interbrands, it's six figures and up, and that's just for the verbal branding part. Doesn't include the visual branding or any of the the other trade dress that goes with it. So I decided to just focus on the naming part. And at first, all I did was come up with the long list of names off of somebody else's brief, and the agency that I was doing it for would do the screening and have all the client interface. After seeing enough shitty creative briefs, I learned to write a better one. And even when agencies brought me the brief, I would use the thinking that I had done in my own brief, and I learned how to screen the names for legal, and that was a really valuable addition in the bandwidth in terms of end to end, right?
Yeah.
So I got my start in sales. I sold ads for Time Magazine, and so I was able to do my own account work. I'm able to write my own creative brief. Of course, I come up with all the names, but now I'm able to do the legal pre-screen. So I get that trademark leverage, and so I can run a much better verbal branding consultation during the list review. And that's the hardest part, is agreeing the final name. Taking them from 300 names down to 30 names, and then from 30 names down to their top 3. And I do that in about 3 weeks. It would take you 3 weeks to get a meeting in the conference room at some of these other agencies.
That's incredible. So then, so first off, can you share some of the names that you've named, or is that something that you're NDA'd under, or is there any names that you can share?
So I named the Subaru CrossTrek. That's the one that everybody's heard of. I think it's been in production for like 6 or 8 years. It's kind of the over/under for namers. Well, have you named a car? Because they put my name on the faceplate of what will be hundreds of thousands of vehicles. And so the agency then wanted their brief said that they wanted the same audio footprint as Outback. And that stuck with me. Of course, it said they want to be memorable and catchy and blah, all the briefs say. But as a namer, you have to tune in and know what 95% to ignore. It's true, but not differentiating, right? And so I decided that the Outback, that its most distinctive linguistic feature was that terminating K. And so I looked around for words that that ended in K, so there were quite a few Trek names on the list. This was a crossover SUV, new to the category back then, but so marrying CrossTrek gives it the same syllabic balance as Outback. You can tell they're not necessarily siblings, but they're cousins.
Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Now you're making me want to be a namer. Sounds so fun and creative. It sounds like an incredible job.
Yeah, so whenever I speak with young people or people that other namers, they always want to say, well, if you ever run out of names, I'll do it for you. And so I go, okay, here's a pop quiz. Give me 10 synonyms for black.
Oh man. Do you want me to do it right now?
Yeah, try.
Dark.
They can edit it out if you're not any good.
Yeah, dark. Oh gosh, abyss.
Okay,
No, that's not a good one.
Ebony.
Ebony. That's a great one. Oh man, that is a good one. Oh
How
man,
about onyx?
space. Onyx. Did you say onyx?
Onyx, yeah. How about
Oh man, this is really hard.
Yeah. How about jet? Jet
Black. Oh, clever.
How about pitch?
Pitch, yeah. That's why I was going with abyss. I was like trying to think of darkness, but
Yeah. So the funniest one I ever heard was because I tell them use similes as black as a and anyways the namer that I was talking to on the phone I said give me 10 synonyms for white. And he had the funniest answer I've ever got. He said whiter than a Rush concert.
oh man.
See, and that's a good connection. That's a brilliant but non-obvious connection. So another thing I named was Coursera. That's a MOOC if you're into online learning. And so
Oh yeah, I love Coursera. I love that you named it. That's amazing.
yeah, and I remember I worked with Daphne Kohler and Andrew Ng from the computer science department at Stanford. I was introduced to them by John Doerr, for the venture capitalist.
Wow.
And so it was a very high level meeting. We did everything on the phone. It took 11 days, and it was about 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night after I got all their kids to bed, and we're doing our list review session, and of course, and so the backstory on Coursera. There was already edX, right? And so I figured that took away the whole ed category, And then there was Udemy and Udacity. So I figured that took the whole university direction away. And then I got in this vein where I was thinking, no one's going to go. They're not going to go to college online. They might just take one class, right? And that led me to things like curriculum and syllabus, and eventually the courses. And so Coursera has a really nice mouthfeel to it, and so it was an instant winner, and that was like 2013, I think. We went to GoDaddy and got it for $8.99 that night.
What an interesting career. I love this. I love that you're a namer. This is like the coolest thing I've ever heard of, and I'm so fascinated by it. But Steve, I do got to ask you, we got to switch gears because this is also about parenting, right? And so I could talk to you about naming probably for the whole show, because it is such a unique profession to me. It is so cool. But let's try to interweave it a little bit and talk about your kid. So you said you had one girl?
Yes. Well, so my first child was a boy, Alexander, and so he's now 35 years old, and so I really like being a dad. I was never a better husband than when I was a dad.
Nice.
And to be able to wrestle on the bed after work, and put him on my shoulders, while I was doing chores outside. I really liked that, and so my wife worked weekends. She was a nurse, and so I got to be, Mr. Mom, and I put him in the backpack or in the sling. So, when I would put him, I had a high chair down in my wood shop. And so he got to, whenever I was banging on something with a hammer, I would give him a little hammer, right? And so we hung out quite a lot, and part of that was selfish. My dad died when I was 10. He was only 38 years old. I thought for sure that I would die when I was 38 years old, and I never knew my dad. I never had a conversation with him, and so I decided I wasn't going to let that happen, and so I made a really good connection with my boy when he was like 3 or 4 years old, and I wanted to go golfing. I put him in his Batman helmet and a cape, and he rode in the cart with me, eating peanut M&Ms, and sometimes we would last 9 holes, sometimes we would last 13 holes, right? But you just got to be flexible. As he got older, we would finish the round and go to the clubhouse, and but you I would never, and even now that's what we do for Father's Day is um, we even rolled a golf cart once. That's a different story. I'll tell you, but it's nice to have a good relationship with your adult kids. And so he's married and lives in Long Island now with his wife, who works at Google. He works at Shopify. So nice outcome. He went to Georgetown University. She was at Georgetown on a soccer scholarship, and they had both blown out their knees in their sport, and so they kind of connected, on that random thing. It's like they met in May of their senior years, right? So can you imagine they were at the same school for 4 years and they barely even
Crossed over. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter, exact opposite. She went to Fordham, and then one of the things she wanted to do when she got to New York was to go to Studio 8H, right? She wanted to see Saturday Night Live, and so it turns out everybody gets in line, and then you draw a ticket, and your ticket is either good for the early show or the second show, and so sometimes by the time you get there, there's only the first show is the only one left, right? But so she's done it 8 or 9 times. But this very first time that she went, all of the girlfriends that she had just recently met that were planning to go with her, they bailed out because it was raining. And she did not want to bail out. So she went and stood in line, and sure enough, it started to drizzle. And the group in front of her had brought a blue tarp, like the kind you get from Home Depot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they opened it up, because you're right alongside the newspaper stands and the bike
Yeah.
rack.
Along the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they put the tarp up, and Sam was right behind them, getting wet, and so they invited her to sit underneath their tarp with them, and it was like, and it was a group of like 8 teenagers that had come down from Boston, so they weren't even local New Yorkers, right? Well, one of the boys was kind of sweet on Sam, and they stayed in touch, and then he took the bus down later, and they went on a date, a one-on-one date, and anyways, 8 years later, they're getting married now in October. So
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's really great story. That's incredible.
and that's what you want for your kids, is for them to make good choices and meet good people, and then I loved Andy's confession. There's not a lot of parenting going on nowadays. Coach doesn't call my number very often, and so I try to be ready, but they're fully capable of, if they got arrested, I wouldn't even find out about it unless they told me. They're fully functioning adults, and I think about them every day, but spoiler alert, they don't think about me every day.
Now you're making me want to call my dad, so I appreciate that. So yeah, I probably should, yeah. And then hopefully your kids will see this and they'll start calling you every day as well too. That's a really great sentiment and point. I love that. And so how do you qualify success as a parent?
Well, yeah, that's a really hard one, and whatever worked for me might not necessarily work for anybody else, and
Yeah.
and I had to figure it out, when in the 1900s and the early 2000s. What a shit show we have going out here in 2021, and
Yeah.
so and every kid is different. Their children are not fungible. They're not interchangeable, right? And so learn your kid, and
Yeah.
and learn what responds. What they respond to, And there's so many bad parents out there, where their first reaction is, to swat the, smack the kid, and if he
Yeah.
reaches for something, they smack the hand, and if he back talks, they smack the mouth, and when you grow up in the South, that type of behavior is, it's pervasive and even kind of expected, and so I was beat as a young person, and I decided I am never going to hit my kids, right? If I can't make my point, verbally. I mean, I'm 6'3" and I weigh 280 pounds, right? I mean, that's not fair, and so, and that, the most I ever did was I would flick them, with one finger, I would flick them, and that was only as a last resort, right? And that got their attention, and so, the temptation is that you want your kids to be like you and do the things that that you were good at, and you might have to let go of that. And so, taking a genuine interest in what the kid wants to do, that's really important. And I think you got to keep throwing stuff at them. If they don't like team sports like basketball and soccer, then try karate, right, or gymnastics, right. And some kids like to take stuff apart, right, and so go to the thrift store and buy a old you know electric mixer for $2 and bring it home on the kitchen table and take that fucker apart.
Yeah.
and use a real screwdriver and see where the wires are and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and you can make it age appropriate. A 5-year-old, you should probably keep it unplugged the entire time. But boy, if you've got a 10-year-old, get the voltage meter out there and show them where the hot wire is and where the current
Yeah.
is. And so I did all of that, and I did the tea parties on the floor, with my daughter, and so, and you can't replace that. But by the time they're a teenager, oh, you either have a relationship with them or you don't, right? And I think it's kind of like a bank account. It's the trust deposit. You have to keep making deposits if you expect to make any withdrawals, right? And so what is the trust account? What is that made of? Well, basically it's your fairness, right, and it's your appropriateness as a parent. As the parent, you quickly realize you're the dictator. You can make them eat whatever you want them to eat. You can make them go to bed anytime you want them to go to bed, right? And so, making that seem, like it's like the routine is beneficial to them while also being convenient to you. That's a real balancing act, especially when you have demands on your time, right? And so, my big advice I would have for parents of young children is don't waste nap time. and kids they need exercise and playtime for the stimulation, but they also need nap time to process that, right? And to
Yeah.
restore themselves for the next round. And so when you get them on a schedule, like take them to the park in the morning, and then when they're young, they might sleep like from 10 to 11:30, and then you give them lunch and have some sort of activity. Then they might sleep from 2 to 4 o'clock, right? Because and then you got to put them to bed, around 8 or 9 o'clock. So kids need a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
And if you get them down for a nap and then you start unstacking the dishwasher, oh, you've already screwed up. If they go down for the nap and then you go fold some laundry, you're already wasting your nap.
What are you talking about? What do you mean by what do you want them to do?
No, they should go they should go take their nap, but then the parent should instantly set on that other thing. This is the work-life balance, right? If you and I wrote a total of 5 books, but I wrote my first 2 children's books during nap time.
No way. You wrote
Yeah.
children's books?
I got a lot of Steves up here.
Oh my gosh, Steve, this is so fun. You're a very creative man.
Yeah, my company is called Manufacturers of Fine Ideas,
Oh, I
and
love it.
MFI. And so naming is just the verbal part of it. But there was a time when I drew these mazes, and the maze, the line you make to solve the maze would draw a picture of something. So I could make a maze that just looks like a regular maze, but when you solve the maze, it is clearly a picture of a cat. Yeah, so I sent a bunch of these to a publisher, and ended up doing. Eventually, got a contract. I got a royalty even from Scholastic.
Wow.
It was sold in the book fair, right? And so I had to self-publish the very first book, but I used that as a sample to send to the other publishers. So, anyways, my kids were my testers, right? And they were the age where, my oldest son, if he would say, Dad, this maze is too hard or this maze is too easy, right? And because when you have two kids that are 7 years apart, there's a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old. See, that's two different audiences right there, right?
Totally.
Well, and so being able to entertain them both, right, and also provide the proper kind of stimulation, for both. That's great. If you have what do you say, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. See, that's pretty much the same age, especially when
Yeah,
they
yeah.
get 6 and 8 years old,
Oh
right?
yeah, it's already like really nice because you can actually have commonalities, right? You can like play the same game, you can play the same puzzle, you can play the same activity, which
Yep.
is really nice. I'm actually really curious about. You said you were like playing Mr. Mom during the earlier days when your wife worked on the weekends, but what time and age frame was that? I mean, did you always have the naming job, or were you like what was that polarity between like working and being a parent? Because it
Yeah,
sounds like you were very, very involved.
I was, and full disclosure, I didn't blossom as a namer until after my divorce, and so, um, and I was divorced in 2008. So I had only done probably 2 or 300 name jobs by then, and had maybe had booked $1 million worth of business. I'm at 840 name jobs now and multiple millions of dollars as a namer. So that didn't happen until afterwards. I was a rep firm for a lot of my career. I sold space in a regional business magazine, and then I got recruited to sell ads in Time magazine. And I realized that, and this was even before the internet, I realized that cable TV was going to put magazines out of business. And so I tried to reinvent myself, and so I instead of calling on ad agencies, I began to rep ad agencies, and I became the point person, the new business guy for that. And so I was able to do some of that from home. I've always had a home office, and so also in the advertising business, but perhaps this. If the agency loses the account, you lose your job, right?
Yeah.
And so my ex had very solid employment at Stanford Hospital, and I was able to do contract work and move around, trying to stay, at the hot agency, right? And in the early '80s and the early '90s, oh, Silicon Valley was shitting kittens,
Yeah.
right? Things were jumping, and so that was good experience. But I would not want to go back there and do it then. The naming business was not very mature at the time,
Yeah.
and it became popular at a really good time for me. If it had happened a little bit later, I'd have been too old to do it. I was a 40-year-old account executive sitting in a room with a bunch of 20 somethings, all with headsets, making 100 cold calls a day. You know
Yeah.
that was the naming agency that I worked at, and I was the only one that made the calls, and I was the only one that got the sits. And so I remember one of my clients was Nike, and the names that my agency had come up with were all stupid. So I put the name. I put some names on the list, and they ended up going with that one,
Can you
and
share? What name?
it was the Corsair. That was what Tiger Woods wore in 1999, 1998.
Wait, Coursera. Wait, which one for Nike?
They were trying to use Air because they have Air Max and Air
Yeah.
Jordan. They were trying to use Air as a prefix,
Mm-hmm.
and that made it too powerful, too quick, too athletic. Golf is smooth and right, and
Mm-hmm.
so I put the Air as a suffix, and because it's played on the golf course, it became the course Air.
Corsair. Oh, that's awesome. I for some reason I was like hearing Coursera, and I'm like, oh, are we still talking about the same thing? But Corsair is the Nike one. That's awesome.
See, and those two name jobs were 15 years apart, 16 years
Wow.
apart. You know,
Wow.
that's the kind of the namer's brain just sifts through, grains of sand, right?
Steve, I have to ask, how did you come up with the names for your kids?
Well, so I really liked Alexander the Great, and I knew he was going to be great, so that was really hard for me to lay off. I also liked to have a name that I could scream, right? And I also,
Yeah.
like on the playground, and I also like to have a name that I could reduce to one syllable. And so Lex was what his pet name was. And so for my daughter, I really liked the idea of having an androgynous name, so that when someone saw it, they weren't 100%, well, whether what the gender would be, right? And so the other day I met, or I read about somebody whose first name was January, and I had no idea whether that was a man or a woman, right? But
Yeah.
but so Samantha can be abbreviated to Sam,
Hmm.
um, and so I ask on my workshops during the introductions, I ask everybody, "Have you named anything?" And some people say, "No, I haven't named anything." I said, "Didn't you name your kids or whatever?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, my kids are Carl and Carol." And I point out, "Oh, see, that's a nomenclature architecture right there. Those two names go together, right?"
Yeah,
And
totally.
somebody else will say, "Yeah, my kids are David and Michael," and it's like both of those are biblical names, right? And so
Yeah.
I try to show them that those types of patterns are extant in the world. I was a creative copywriter before, and I read an article about short stories and how to create characters.
Hmm.
And the rule of thumb, which is so fascinating, if you want to come up with a name that sounds like a really believable name for a man, give him a one syllable first name and a two syllable last name, like Dick Tracy, Dan
Oh my
Rather.
gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
These
that's
are
the
little these are the tricks. These are the psychological things that you need to know.
E40, right?
Oh
He's a
wow.
rapper,
I
right?
know, right, 40.
So that's the form factor.
So funny.
If you're trying to come up with a male name that's got cred to it. For females, it's the exact opposite. It's a two syllable first name and a one syllable last name,
Oh,
like
no way.
Nancy Drew, right? Lady Di. Anyways, that's just.
Wow.
If you want to come up with a character that you're trying to signal that she's really distinct, right? Then give her a name like Hermione, right? And that doesn't fit the form factor at all. So she's
Yeah.
not going to be a stick figure character, right?
Yeah.
So translating that to naming, most people can't come up with their own set of alchemist rules for how to do naming. And what you find as a namer is that the dictionary only takes you so far, right?
Yeah.
All the words are taken. You almost always have to combine a new word, or what I do is make up a new word. And so I have a theory that the further deep in your mouth the sound originates, and the further back on your tongue the sound, the bigger the thing is. Like Google, right? It's
Yeah.
it's so that glottal stop signals enormity, and the opposite is true. The further out in the tip of your tongue and the higher in the roof of your mouth the sound originates, the closer to your lips, the more precise the thing is. Like say the word precise. See how all that mouthfeel is in the front.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is the coolest thing ever. Steve, this is so fun. I'm like so enamored by your job. I can't even focus right now. But so when you named your kid, you did it based on the fact that you had you wanted him to be great like Alexander the Great, so you got Alexander. And then for Samantha, you wanted her to have an androgynous name, so she didn't have any kind of restrictions when it came to like her name and her abilities. So you gave her Sam.
Yes.
That's so like it's a good reason, but it seems so logical for how creative you are.
And they both of those names worked out.
Yeah,
Sometimes
totally.
kids change their names or whatever.
Yeah.
My youngest sibling, her name is Dee, and I heard her introduce herself one time, and she just cracked me up. She's a mountain climber. She leads Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School.
Wow.
Anyways, she got up and introduced herself. She says, "Hi, my name is Dee. I'm the fourth of four children. My brothers and sisters' names are A, B, and C."
Nice. Clever. So she made a joke and a pun out of her name. I love it. I do something similar with my name too. I mean, because my name is Young, and so it's really easy for me to like make jokes about it, or people will obviously suggest jokes with it almost immediately, and it's very very fun to have a name like that you can make a joke with, because it's a really great way to build rapport and relationship very quickly.
Yes. So I'm dyslexic, and when I see words, my brain rearranges them into other words. And so I just recently had some dental work done. I'm not quite finished with yet, but
Yeah.
as I'm walking past my dentist sign outside of his office, it says Dr. Lipson, Lipson, and I realized, that's an anagram of slip-on. And
Nice.
so I mentioned that to him, and he cracked up laughing and showed me he was wearing slip-ons.
Oh my gosh.
And he's 55 years old and never knew that about himself.
Yeah.
But being dyslexic, that I'm glad nobody ever cured me of that, right? But it plays into how I did transition to become a namer. I used to do, I'm very good at Scrabble, so I played Scrabble with my kids and my
Bet you are really good at Scrabble. I can't even imagine playing against you.
yeah.
Sounds
So
amazing.
I would let my son double hit the score of whatever word he wrote, and I would let my daughter triple it, and she could quadruple it if it was more than 4 letters. I had to eventually change that to 5 letters. But that way I could handicap them, right? But also teach them the full width and breadth of my vocabulary. And I'm a firm believer that reading unlocks a lot of doors, and the better a reader you are, the better writer you are. And being able to express yourself is very valuable in business, but it also is good for your mental health. And so we would always play word games in the car, and so I saw Camry in front of me, and I thought to myself, Camry, that's an anagram of Marcy. I wonder if her name is Marcy. As soon as I formulated that thought, Young, I realized it's also an anagram of my car, right? If you
Yeah,
read
it is.
the letters of, yeah. So I almost ran into Marcy in her Camry.
That's
And
amazing.
this was before the internet, so I had to go to the business library where I knew the librarian, and she recommended a couple of publications that I had to check them out,
You're
and it turns out it comes from kanmarai, which is the Japanese word for crown, and that goes with Corolla and Corona and all the rest of it. But see, I was hooked. That's the name of my company is Where Words. And I have always been fascinated with where the words come from.
hmm
Like you've probably got Nabisco in your pantry right now.
Yeah.
It's possible to like the name Nabisco and never put it together that it's a contraction of National Biscuit Company.
No way. That's awesome.
Right?
I never knew that. That's really great. That's it. That's the origin.
Yes, and so I tell those stories in my workshops just to demonstrate that the best names are not always sensible and logical
I
and
love that. That's great.
yeah, and so when I told that Nabisco story to a company, the the genius coder, I'll call him, he looks at me with over the top of his glasses with just his eyes, and he says, "We do root cause analysis. What would you call us?" And I blurt named the company Rocana, and you can totally hear root cause analysis in Rocana. And that turned out to be the company name. And
Oh my god. That's amazing. That is so fun. So, what do your kids think about you being a namer? So, if it's like a second coming in your professional career here, and you kind of found your groove like later on, what do they think about it?
Yeah, they're over it.
They're over it.
Yeah, my dad's a namer. And
Yeah.
and they've kind of come to accept it. And but truly, they've each hired me professionally. They've each been at companies that had a naming problem, and have hired me,
Wow.
and so there's that kind of I love it when worlds collide, right?
That's
But
amazing.
I like to also think that they see me taking chances. It's, it's not like I bought $1 million worth of lumber and then I resold it for $1.5 million, and that's how
Yeah,
I
yeah.
made my money. No, I'm in nylon basketball shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, right? And all I do is just think of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they know that I would sit and play Scrabble all day anyways for
Yeah,
free.
yeah.
So for me to be able to monetize this really quirky ability, I think that gives them confidence to go out and
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point because it's like leading by example, right? It's like if someone can like have a lucrative career doing what they love and they're passionate about, it definitely opens up a lot of different doors, or at least breaks down a lot of ceilings, right? Like the constraints are much more lighter, very very lighter, right? And so
in my business, there's no market for B plus work. You've got to have A plus work, otherwise there's no market for it, right?
yeah,
And so there's no such thing as good enough. As a namer, it's not enough to be creative. I have to be original, right? I have to keep thinking of new ways to do it, because confusingly similar is the reason why most trademarks get rejected, right?
yeah,
So my kids have heard all my advice, but the big piece of advice is outcomes are important, but we can't manage outcomes, right? All we can do is manage the process to achieve the outcome.
oh gosh, that's
So,
brilliant.
so
That's brilliant.
if you're not getting the outcomes that you want, if you're not meeting your goals, then go back and look at your process, right? And most bosses, you probably have experienced this. Most bosses, they obsess on the goal, right? And they continually point out that you're not meeting the goal or whatever, and instead of asking why, right? And so, as a parenting standpoint, your kids they're going to do some of the things you want them to do, but they're not going to do some of the things that like picking up their toys.
Yeah,
You know, at a certain point, you decide that they can help put the toys back in the toy box, right?
right, right, right.
At first, you do it all, right, and then later they help you. But then it comes a day when you say, "Okay, I need for you to put all these toys back in the toy box," right? And maybe they do it, and maybe they don't. See, but that's a goal, that's an outcome, right?
Hmm.
And so, if they don't do it, rather than scold them or hit them or whatever, ask them, why didn't you put this one in? And they might say, oh, I didn't see that one, right?
Hmm.
Or they might say, oh, it's too heavy, or I couldn't reach it, right?
It's almost like parenting has taught you how to like be a namer.
Well, and I am a lifelong learner. I don't do anything half-ass. I'm always all in, and
Wow.
I can't wait to be a grandpa, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome. That's so cool.
a couple of years ago, I decided I saw some kid on the Nextdoor app. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
The Nextdoor app. He was selling his Lego collection because he had broken his iPhone, and his parents were making him pay for half of the new one. I instantly loved his parents, right? Because people don't respect what they don't pay for. So they gave this 13-year-old an iPhone, and he promptly broke it. And they weren't going to buy him another one. They were going to make him pay for half of the new phone. And he was going to fund his half of it by selling some of his boyhood toys. And so when I met him, his dad came by, drove him over, and he brought him in. I could tell that it was a big decision for him, and it was like 3 tubs of the 12 quart flop lid, and he wanted like $120 for them or whatever. And I paid him, in $20 bills, right? So, anyways, I have about 10 tubs of Legos right now. So when I finally get a grandkid to come to the house, we're going to build the biggest Lego castle you ever saw.
Yeah, that was just to support the idea of parenting and the process.
And I like the idea of giving back, and
Yeah,
donating. And sometimes you give money to an organization and you don't even know what happens to it, right? And
yeah,
so I have always bought an ad in the program for the local high school fall sports kind of thing.
yeah,
And I don't even know if they even print them or if they pass them out in the stands. I've never gotten a call from it or anything.
yeah. You just do it.
Yeah, yeah, I just do it, and so one time I got a call from somebody. And I said, where's I think her name was Helen or some whatever, my normal rep." And she goes, "Oh, we're not actually in your neighborhood. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. This is just a call list." And it's like, I'm not even supporting my school by buying an ad in this. And so that's when I decided. That's when I decided that I would pass out socks to homeless people on New Year's Eve, right? And sometimes I would slip a half pint of Jack Daniels inside the. That's what I hope somebody would do for me if I was
You're
in.
like you're like a walking bohemian. Like the more you talk, the more I'm like, wow, you just have a lot of things that are like going through your mind and in your life and your day. It sounds like you're constantly on the move and things are just changing and rapidly moving around. It's awesome.
And that's the key to happiness, I'm, you look around, most people are not very happy right now. And I've thought about this because I know I'm blessed. I get to do as much or as little as I want of the thing that I'm best at, right? Happiness comes when you can align your activities with your values. It sounds so simple, but it's not easy at all. And the biggest problem is that a lot of people have not taken the time to articulate what their values are. And of those of us that have prioritized our values, we oftentimes spend our days doing something that has nothing to do with
Yeah,
our values.
absolutely. I'd say the vast majority is that way, and I think that you just hit something on the head, and it's like so important to teach my kids, right? Like being really grounded and centered in what you want, and being able to like merge those twos is a really good way of qualifying success. Would you say that that's like how you qualify success in business?
At some level, you have to be solving a client's problem, right?
Yeah,
And so like Einstein said, just stating the problem is like half of solving it. But later on, that it's like you can't solve the problem at the level that the problem exists, right? And that's a key part of satisfying the client, and also being a parent. You've got to get above the level of what you make and do, right? And so, like, if your 4-year-old is hitting the 2-year-old, right? You could just make her stop, right? But teaching her why that's not the right thing to do. That's what the real lesson is here.
yeah,
And so if you're always a bully to them by taking things away from them with no explanation, that's what you're teaching them to do,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So sometimes clients come to me with unrealistic expectations, and maybe you've discovered this. It's difficult to disabuse people of their misinformation, right? Will Rogers says, "It ain't what you don't know that causes all the problems. It's what you know that ain't so." Right?
Clever.
And
Yeah, I
so,
like that.
and so with clients, I have to quickly establish my street cred, right? And so it helps to have a big, thick portfolio, but I also try to let them know, you know, unless you just got $40 million worth of Google Ventures money, I'm probably not going to put Prism.com on your list, right? Because that's
It's not
another.
realistic.
It's
Yeah,
not, right?
yeah,
And so I try to let them know, what the outcome is going to be. I
yeah,
My kids have heard me say over and over, I just love it when a plan comes together, right? And
yeah.
so my plan, I need to get repeatable results as a namer, right? And everybody's name job is different. I just named a women's health thing for air. I'm naming a GPS app now. I named a skincare thing recently. Just to go from
So
all
fun.
those, and I get to be an instant expert on some new topic every
Yeah.
week. And rather than let that overwhelm me, I embrace that. I'm one of those lifelong learners that has to intellectualize about everything, right?
Yeah.
I'm
That's
that
awesome.
kind of a-hole. And
No, I think it's great. I think that's what's led you to having really two really successful kids, and it sounds like they're doing really well. And I think there's a lot to glean from that level of thinking and the way that you're philosophically tackling life, both personally as a parent and also professionally. I mean, it's working out for you really, really well.
well, and I'm not afraid to fail. In baseball, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're going to Cooperstown, baby.
That's right. That's actually good, right? That's exactly it. Hey, so I actually want to make sure that I squeeze in the rapid fire questions. I have 4 questions I like to ask every guest, just to make sure there's some symmetry to the interviews. So I'm going to fire those off for you, okay? Before we wrap up here.
Sure.
What advice do you have for other parents and soon to be parents?
Well, this might be a bit of a downer, but if you're going through a rough patch with your spouse, right? Maybe you're talking about divorce, or maybe even you got divorced. Resist the temptation of demonizing your the other person, right?
Yeah.
And don't compete for their attention or their affection, right? And explain it to them in a way that they can understand, and ways. That's if that's too much of a downer. The more
No.
functional advice is, whenever they do something wrong, let them in, let them back in. Redemption is very important. Show them the path to atone for that awful thing they did. Right?
Yeah.
Don't just scold them, and don't keep them on timeout. Because
Yeah, that's great.
their
Both
self-talk is brutal.
both answers are awesome. I think those are both really sound advice. If you can go back and tell yourself one thing before having kids, what would it be?
Nothing will ever be the same again. Right? That
Buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up, Buttercup. Things are
Yeah, that's right.
bumpy,
Very
and
good.
it might be decades before you get the right amount of sleep again. Right?
It's a good one. Yeah. So, what is the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself after you became a parent?
Where does the love come from? And I remember thinking, oh, am I gonna have to take the love, that I was giving my spouse in order to make love, give this new love to my kid? And no, it's like this is all new love that you get, and I was unprepared for that epiphany. Yeah.
Yeah, the volume of love you can give. Yeah, it's really extraordinary. It is. And then to close us out, Steve, what is your all-time favorite business book?
Well, it's got to be David Ocker. He wrote two books. One's called Building Strong Brands, and the other's called Managing Brand Equity. And these were in the mid '90s. He was professor emeritus at Cal, I've referenced those books more than anything.
Nice.
The best advice I ever got, though, was that your brain is a zero sum game, right? All you've got is 100% of what you've got. You might have more than me, I might have more than you, but all each of us has is 100% of whatever amount we've got. And in order to compete at a really high level, and that's what all the business books try to focus on, is how you get those elite results. In order to compete at a high level and produce at a high level, you need 100% of your brain. And that's what's wrong with multitasking, because you just do two things crappily, right? So the problem, and this is really relevant to the parenting challenge, is like how do you be all in for the business that you're trying to accomplish that day, but still be present as a parent, right? And
Yeah.
I think that the problem that people get into is that they got a problem that's taken up like 10% of their brain. Maybe they're mad at their spouse, or their kid is sick or whatever, and it's tempting to think, well, I still got 90% of my brain left, right? No, in actuality, it takes about another 10%, maybe a little bit more, to put it on top of it like noise canceling, just so that you can function, right? And you get that, but see, now you're at the 75% level. That might not be enough to clear the fences, right? Well,
Yeah.
it even gets worse for what if you have two problems, right?
Yeah.
So
That's really, really, really deep. Yeah.
yeah, so
Very cool.
so focusing on the dominant variable, I think most people, they get too dilute. They try to be too much of a generalist, right?
Yeah.
And I think that be the best left-handed violinist that you can be, right? Don't just bill yourself as an orchestra member, right?
Yeah.
Own that quirk, right? And I think that's the best example that I ever gave for my kids, is that whatever I was doing, I was not afraid to fail in front of them, but I was doing it the best that I could, and they saw me get away with failing a lot, simply
Yeah.
because I had some integrity about it. But anyways,
Very good.
that's a
Steve,
story.
thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. This was a wonderful conversation to have, and what a joy to get to know you better and learn more about your profession and a whole industry that I didn't know about, and then also just the parallels of your profession and your parenting. It seems like you mix the two really, really well.
Thanks very much. It's been on my mind a lot because I'm walking my daughter down the aisle, and it's like Andy Cunningham said. It's like having kids is like baking a very long cake, right?
Yeah.
You don't really you don't really know how you did until the fullness of time. So I've been reflecting on that, and I enjoyed reflecting on it with you too today.
Oh, thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care.
Hats off.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Girl Dad Show. We hope you enjoyed that interview. And if you want to subscribe to our email list and learn more, you can head over to thegirldadshow.com. Thank you and see you next time.